Hello, good evening and welcome to another program on Law and Order. The program every week now comes to you at Friday at 9:30, bringing you an area of law that is important to you, to educate you on that area of law with an expert specialist guest. Now today we're going to talk of an area which is very common to all of us. As you know, we all need money and we borrow money sometimes. Most often than not, we borrow money now. Sometimes we have security to keep for that. Sometimes we don't. Most of the time we keep properties as security. So today in our program, we're going to check into what are the issues relating to properties, securities and borrowing money. And to discuss this, we have a very experienced attorney in these areas as well as in other areas of civil law practice. It is Jagat Wickramanayake, attorney at law, and he's a civil law practitioner in Colombo, specializing in this area of law as well. Jagat, thank you very much for taking time off your very busy schedule and coming to Rupavahini today. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, money lenders, if I may say, money lenders, you can just recall what I introduced. You know, these are issues that comes to us which we don't see generally a specific one answer or two answer. Can you, to start up, tell me what is the type of money lending available in Sri Lanka?
Mainly, Chanakya, money lending is done through the proper channels, you know, like banks, they lend money. Then finance companies in different forms, you know, they lend money. So when you go for those companies or when you obtain facilities from those banks or companies, the risk, you can say, is minimal. But mostly the most famous, or rather the most popular system of money lending or borrowing is from the informal sources.
Right.
That is, especially at village level, not even in villages, you know, even in Colombo you see, there are people, they lend money. So they're actually known as money lenders. When you borrow money from them, you know, like you face different kinds of issues because, you know, it's not done in accordance with the law most of the time. So those are the two kinds of main ways of money lending in this country.
Is this a cultural thing? Is it something that has culturally come up and people trust to find a lender than going through a banking process?
I personally feel, in fact, in one of the Supreme Court judgments, the lordships in the Supreme Court also had highlighted this matter. I actually brought it today. You know, mostly what happens is when you go to a bank, the bank is looking at your credit worthiness. Bank is looking at the value of the property, how to recover, because, you know, they have certain formalities that they need to follow. But when you go to an informal money lender, that money lender would not be looking at all these things. And it's quicker. You know, the procedure is quicker. You can ask, but of course they'll charge higher amount of interest. And sometimes I think, you know, some of these money lenders have black money. They're not disclosed those monies to the income tax and, you know, that kind of stuff. So the undisclosed money, you can't utilize for something, because if you buy a property out of that, there is a chance that, you know, the Department of Inland Revenue would come to know about it and might query. So because of that, what they do is they use this kind of informal ways of lending money. So that's how it is done. You can't really say that it's cultural thing, but of course there are certain, you know, that I can say that, you know, especially in villages, there are people, there are mudalalis, you know, like they do that as a business. But of course, you know, there is you know, you get people in Colombo, people in you know, the town areas where they do this kind of money lending.
Right. And these people who go to this kind of lenders are in an urgent need of money. Now, I know there are a lot of issues, we'll get into that. But one of the ways I have seen is when you are lending money, these lenders, or when you're borrowing money, ask for some security. And more often than not, they ask if you have a property, and most of the people have a property, to transfer that in their name. And most of the people don't look into the repercussions of that. What happens in a situation like this? Isn't this a common occurrence in your practice as well?
Of course, you're absolutely right. You know, now, mostly what happens is the informal money lenders, they're not really, you know, they need a quicker procedure to recover their money. So they don't want to go through the normal, you know, the legal process in court. And, you know, like, you know, for an example, if you get a mortgage bond in your favor as a money lender, you can go to court and file action and you can put the mortgage bond in suit and recover your money with the interest. But that takes time.
Right.
But here the business is, they give you the money today, they lend you the money today,
Yeah.
and they collect it, we say three months down, after 3 months or 4 months, they collect the money back and they give it to another person for high interest. So that's the kind of business they do. So they always try to get, these transfers executed in their favor, because one thing, then they have the property, they can sell it and recover their money. Otherwise, it's easy for them to apply pressure on the person who has borrowed the money also, because your property, you're going to lose your property. And most of the time, the common occurrence is, we say if the property is valuable, we say about 10 million rupees, but what you are getting is only about 1 million rupees, very small amount.
Yeah.
So it's always easy for this kind of money lenders. They're actually not registered money lenders. Now see, we have an ordinance in this country called Money Lending Ordinance. You have to follow certain procedures, you have to maintain accounts. They bypass all these things. And that's how they do the business.
Okay. So what is the remedy? Now, like you said, I transfer a property for, we'll say 2 million in a rush, and then I get this money, and my value of the property is about 10 million. Now, what is the remedy of my getting that property back? Is there a way? Because you have done a clean transfer here and registered.
True.
Yeah.
On the face of it, on the face of the document, it's a notarially attested proper deed of transfer.
Yeah.
Right. As you know, in terms of Section 2 of the Prevention of Frauds Ordinance, if there is a immovable property transaction that is taking place, it has to be done by way of a notarially executed deed. So it's being done in that way, properly registered in the land registry. So on the face of it, what you see is a clear transfer, as you say. But it does not mean that you are without a remedy. There is a remedy. So what you can do is, you must look at the whole transaction.
Correct.
Now, when you look at the whole transaction, you should be having evidence to show. We say, for an example, we say you have to undergo a sort of a surgery urgently. You don't have money. You can't apply for a loan because you don't have those required qualifications to obtain that kind of a loan from the bank. So the informal sources, you go there, then immediately they'll do the transfer and give you the money.
Yeah.
So then you have a transfer deed. There is a transfer deed. On the face of it, it's a complete transfer deed.
Right.
But there is a thing in the law called constructive trust.
Right.
Constructive trust, if I may explain that to you, constructive trust is something where, on the face of it, you have transferred the property. But the attendant circumstances, when you look at the rest of it, there are judgments which are specified, what kind of things that you can take into consideration. It is not really a transfer. You have no intention of parting with the beneficial interest of the property. You're not really giving the property. It's only as security you are executing the deed, deed of transfer. So in those circumstances, you really can challenge it in court. You can go to court and you can challenge it, and then you can get a transfer done subject
back to you.
Yeah, of course. You can get a court order compelling the other party to transfer it back to you upon payment of whatever the money that is due to the other person.
Right. Now here there is another legal position, if I may bring it. You have executed a written document.
Yes.
And then, like you said, in order to get it on the basis of constructive trust or some similar circumstance, you go to court, and now you are leading oral evidence. Isn't there a contradiction here?
There is. There is, certainly, because by looking at it, anybody can understand. You have a notarially attested proper document. And now we are going to say, though it is a deed of transfer, it is not a deed of transfer. Now, complete converse situation you are going to elaborate in court by way of oral evidence. So that's, in normal circumstances, not permissible. If you look at Section 91 and 92 of the Evidence Ordinance, you can see you can't lead parallel evidence to contradict what is there in the written document.
Right.
But this is an exception to that. When you're pleading, when you're trying to establish a constructive trust, there are certain other exceptions as well, like fraud. You still can lead parallel evidence. So in those circumstances, the law has recognized, by way of authorities, by way of case laws, in taking into consideration the requirement or the demand or inequity, whether it is reasonable for someone to say that, because the law says this, whether because of that you can't lead evidence to contradict that. So the court has recognized that. There are a series of authorities, there are a series of judgments where they establish, where the Supreme Court and the higher courts of this country had recognized that right. You really can lead evidence to contradict the document.
Right. Would you be kind enough to tell us, maybe not mentioning parties, about in your nearly 2 decades of practice, a situation like this, where people were really caught in a moment or a position?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Now, I remember there was a matter that actually, I also appeared for a party in that case. A gentleman who had a prime property, who owned a prime property in Kandy, had to execute a transfer deed because he needed some money
urgently
for a urgent surgery. So what really happened was the particular document, it was actually not really a deed of transfer. It's a conditional transfer. There was a condition in that, within a particular period of time, you have to retransfer the property. That was the condition. But before the expiration of that particular period, if you go to court on the basis that, you have time, but this is not the real intention, or this, like the transaction was something else, you still can challenge it. So actually what happened was it did not go to the extent of, giving the judgment, the party settled the matter before, because there were some other parties who were interested in purchasing the property. But what happened was in that case, this particular party had evidence about this surgery coincide with the date of the deed of transfer. So there's no issue, like when you put all those things in place and they continue to be in occupation. The stamp duty now, in normal circumstances, if you're buying a property, you go to a notary whom you know personally, whom you can trust. So that's the practice we have. So then you select your notary to execute the deed because the seller has nothing to lose. It's only you will have, because you're paying money, and if the particular is not, if the title is not properly checked, you will fall into trouble. So you always go to a notary whom you know. But in this kind of situation, those money lenders have, their people.
Their own people.
Their own people.
Do all
so
the documentation.
They will ask you to go. So the client didn't know, the party didn't know. Then the stamp duty, usually, will be borne by the purchaser. But here what happens is with the money, whatever the money that you got, the consideration as seen on the document, they deduct the stamp duty money and pay it.
Right.
This kind of evidence you really can leave in court.
Yes. Right. So, now, are there situations, in situations like this, where people, the example you said the system still allows you to recover it properly. But are there situations where, due to lack of evidence or inability to lead those evidence properly, or not counsels or whoever not being able to do it properly, people actually lost their properties?
Enough and more.
Enough and more.
Enough.
So what's
because
the recourse?
you can't blame the system for that. Now if you look at the judge's duty is to look at the evidence, evaluate the evidence, and decide in the end. So it's very unfortunate, like we have seen in certain matters where either, the lack of evidence, the parties are not being able to bring, the proper evidence to court, or sometime, like somebody would have made a mistake, missed some evidence in court, missed, for some reason not that evidence had not been led. So that kind of situations, in the end, court will have to decide. Otherwise, you look at the other side of the story. Now, I purchase a property today. That's a real, transaction, a real transfer. I pay money, I pay the consideration. And after that, the seller comes and says, I never sold this property. This is a constructive trust. Because I'm not a money lender, I have not lent money to anybody. I only wanted to purchase the property. Then, I'm in trouble. So everybody will start challenging. So court will look at the evidence. So you need to establish your case. Otherwise, the presumption is always in favor of the deed.
Right.
It's always in favor of the deed. It's on the burden is on you to prove otherwise.
Right.
And show that.
Now the whole thing in this transaction, this type of lending, revolves around this constructive trust. If you can prove it, you win it. Now just explain to us, on the viewers, what is the difference between this and a mortgage? this trust, constructive trust, is not a mortgage. Am I correct?
Yeah, of course. It's not a mortgage. There are authorities to say that as well. The mortgage is completely different. Mortgage is a document that you execute to secure a particular, some sort of a credit transaction. If that particular money is not paid with interest as agreed, then you can put the bond in suit.
Right.
You go to court, you file it. The advantage of having that is now once the mortgage bond is properly registered in the land registry, you always get priority. You can't, if the other party wants to sell it, can sell. Nothing prevents you from selling. But of course, it's always subject to this particular mortgage. So mortgage gets priority. So you put that in suit, in court, and you go ahead with the matter. Then at the end of the day, after you leading evidence, once you establish that, this particular person has obtained so much of money from you, had borrowed so much of money from you, agreement was this, and now this is the security given. Court in the decree, in the judgment itself, will give authority to sell that particular property and recover.
Right.
Now in normal circumstances, if you get a judgment in your favor for, I'm talking about money decree, you have a decree in your favor, you have a judgment in your favor to recover so much of money. So in terms of section 218 of the Civil Procedure Code, you really can't go and seize the property of, the residential property of the defendant. If it is the only house in which you reside, at the time of filing action and at the time of filing, at the time of the judgment, your residential property cannot be seized. But when it comes to a mortgage, if that particular property has been mortgaged, the court gives judgment, even, irrespective of that fact, to sell the property. Right. So you can sell and recover your money.
Right. What is, now in these situations, the situations which we discussed earlier on the constructive trust, is it only the courts you can go, or what is the role of the Debt Conciliation Board?
Yeah, actually Debt Conciliation Board, I would say, is a place where you get an opportunity to negotiate and come to some sort of reasonable settlement. It's not like a courthouse,
right.
But of course I think, they act like judges,
yes.
But they're not really judicial officers. So that is a kind, it's a place less expensive. You don't have to, spend so much money for litigation when you go to the Debt Conciliation Board. But only thing, Debt Conciliation Board, when it comes to, on the face of it, if it is a deed of transfer, in terms of section, I think in 1999, they brought an amendment and they introduced a new section. As far as I can remember, it's 19A and 19B. Even if it is a transfer, even on the face of it, if you continue to occupy the land, if you're in occupation, you can go to the Debt Conciliation Board. There is a time period within which you have to go. It says 3 years. That says 3 years. Yes. But if you're in occupation, Act provides for that as well. If you're in occupation, even afterwards, after expiration of 3 years, you still can go to Debt Conciliation Board.
Yeah. What if it doesn't work out in the Debt Conciliation Board? Can you go appellate procedure available from there?
It's like this. What I think, as far as I know, most of the matters get settled there. Because our parties also will realize there are certain people they're seasonal litigants. They like to litigate. But of course that's a hassle. When you go through this litigation process, it's nothing luxurious. So you can avoid, you can try to avoid litigation. So that's that kind of a platform that provides for good settlements. If you're not settling it, the Debt Conciliation Board is empowered to give an order. So that order, you have to comply with that order. If you do not comply, you can go to the district court and enforce that, because the Debt Conciliation Board does not have the teeth to enforce it. So you have to go to the district court, but that district court matter won't take long, because you have a judgment. It's just a matter. Yeah, it's like enforcing arbitral
commercial high court. Right. Now, what is your advice to people right now who are watching, who are in an urgency, need of money? Now, you explained all the nitty-gritties and the good and the bad and the ugly of what can happen. What is your advice? Somebody who needs money urgently, should they follow these traditional ways which you've been doing, because there is recourse to getting it back, or should they not, or what is your advice?
Okay, now, actually, you're
Very
putting
difficult
me-
to say.
Yeah, very extremely difficult
No
because
one answer, I
it's
suppose.
your need.
It's your need.
You need the money. We say for urgent heart surgery, you need money. What can you do? If you go to the bank will say by looking at your credit worthiness,
Yes.
you are not worthy enough to give this money. We can't lend you because they have rules and regulations. So they can't, bypassing those things, give you money in whatever the circumstances. So ultimately, you will be compelled to go to a informal, that kind of a money lender. I would say, if you have no other alternative, if you are left with only this remedy, and you need that money, you have to transfer your property. What can you do? You will have to do. But what you can do is you be little vigilant about it.
Right.
When
That's-
you do the transaction, whatever the evidence that you can preserve and keep to show that you never intended to sell the property, you never intended to part with your beneficial interest, you can have evidence. Like probably if you pay the stamp duty, like you go to the bank, you pay the stamp duty, you fill up the form. You have to deposit it to the bank. When you deposit that, you fill up the form in your own handwriting. You can say that in court. You have done it because this is not the normal practice. You're the seller. Seller won't be paying the stamp duty.
Right.
These kind of things you can
Keep
do.
the evidence.
Keep the evidence. Preserve the evidence. And if you're paying the interest monthly, try to put to the bank account or send a check. Some proof you have to show that it was a money lending transaction. That evidence will come in very handy
For
when
you.
you go to court.
Jagat Vikramanayake, thank you very much for joining Law and
My
Order. It was
pleasure.
very insightful thoughts on a rare area of law. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And that's Law and Order for you today. Our guest was Jagat Vikramanayake, and we were discussing issues relating to properties, borrowings and lending, money lending in Sri Lanka. We'll join you next week at the same time with another program on Law and Order. Until then, have a good time and enjoy the rest of the programming on Channel 9. Good night.